You are standing in the shadowed halls of Greenwich Palace on a suffocating July morning in the year 1588. The air is thick with the smell of bodies rarely washed, with the damp rot of rushes spread on the floor, and with the heavy perfumes poured over courtiers to hide the truth beneath. Behind the great wooden doors you hear the sound of silk and the low murmur of voices, for Queen Elizabeth I is holding court. As you come closer, another odor cuts through the sweet haze. It is sharp and metallic, like copper coins left in stagnant water, mixed with the musk of skin that seldom touched soap. On the throne sits the Virgin Queen, Gloriana herself, dressed in cloth of gold and pearls. Her face is pale and powdered white as snow. When she smiles, her teeth show the color of autumn leaves. The courtiers lean forward, not only from respect, but because her words are easier to catch at close distance. This was the woman who crushed the Spanish Armada and ruled England for 45 years with an iron will wrapped in silk. Yet behind the splendid mask lay habits that today would make anyone recoil. Before we turn to these forgotten customs of survival and decay, if you enjoy learning such hidden truths, press like and subscribe for more stories from the past. Write in the comments where you are watching from. It is striking that across the world we share these old tales, linked by curiosity and time. The private life of Elizabeth Tudor reads like a list of medieval nightmares, each habit more disturbing than the last. To understand why England's greatest queen lived this way, we must remember her world. Bathing was seen as dangerous, medicine was guesswork, and even monarchs lived in conditions that would horrify us now. Elizabeth kept a quarterly bath. By the measure of her age, this was advanced. She bathed once every 3 months, whether it seemed needed or not. Her own words, recorded by attendants, were clear. I bathe once every 3 months, whether I need it or not. Most of her people went far longer, sometimes years, fearing that water opened the pores to sickness and evil spirits. When she did wash, the act became a performance. Servants dragged a huge copper tub into her chamber and filled it with water heated over the kitchen fires. That water came from the Thames, already polluted with sewage, with carcasses, and with the waste of workshops and tanneries. The soap was no comfort. It was made from animal fat, ash, and lye. The fat, often rancid, was from pigs and cattle. The ash came from palace chimneys. Together they formed a mixture strong enough to strip skin as well as dirt. 90 long days stretched between each bath. 90 days of sweat, perfume, and the odor of Tudor England. As the weeks passed, Elizabeth's body gathered layers of sweat, dead skin, and the powders she used to mask her odor. By the end of the 3 months, courtiers could smell her approach before she entered. Records from 1579 tell a clear story. The French ambassador wrote to his king that he had to hold a pomander of herbs to his nose during an audience. He said the queen gave off such odors that speaking near her was almost unbearable. His wife fainted during a formal dinner. The court declared it was from heat, but all present knew it was the stench rising from the royal table. The queen's teeth became her most infamous scandal. By her 40s they were black with decay, and her smile unsettled ambassadors so much that they reported it in detail. The ruin of her mouth began with her craving for sugar. In the 16th century, sugar cost more than gold and stood as a sign of wealth. Elizabeth ate it daily. She enjoyed marchpane, candied violets, preserved fruits, sugared nuts, and sweet wines. She sucked on sugar crystals through the day, bathing her teeth in sweetness for hours. Dental care did not exist. There was no brushing, no flossing, no cleaning. At best, there was an occasional rinse with wine or rose water, both filled with sugar that made decay worse. By her 30s, her teeth had turned brown, then amber, and by her 40s they were black. Observers wrote that her teeth sometimes broke when she bit food, leaving pieces of black enamel on her lips. The pain was constant and often unbearable. At times she could eat nothing solid and lived on broths and liquid remedies. Courtiers noted her hand pressed to her jaw in public, a sign of torment all recognized. Dr. John Dee offered grim cures. He advised rinses with urine, powders of pearls and wine, and even pressing hot iron to her jaw to burn away corruption. By her 50s, Elizabeth had lost several teeth, and those that remained were loose. Her breath became notorious. They said it smelled like a charnel house, worse than a battlefield after days in the sun. In 1590, the Venetian ambassador wrote that the queen's teeth were so black and rotten that it was a wonder she could still speak. He said the odor forced him to breathe through his mouth during the whole audience. Her famous red hair after her 30s was mostly fiction. It was hidden beneath wigs that became new sources of filth and misery. The queen began to lose her hair because of the lead cosmetics she used to keep her skin white. It was also damaged by the many treatments she tried in the hope of bringing back her natural hair. The wigs were made from the hair of poor women who sold it to feed their families. When purchased, the hair was often dirty and filled with lice, and cleaning methods were very basic. The wigs were sewn onto silk or linen caps with animal sinew thread. They were held in place with metal pins and combs that rusted when soaked with sweat. Elizabeth's scalp made everything worse. Lead poisoning had left it covered in open sores and painful lesions. Wearing wigs every day stopped the wounds from healing, creating constant infection and irritation. The wigs were never washed. They were only brushed and dusted with powders. They collected months of sweat, oil, and smoke from the palace. The mix of unwashed hair, decaying matter, and perfumes created a smell that marked the queen's approach. Lice thrived in the warm and damp space under the wigs. Her ladies-in-waiting spent hours each day removing them, but the insects always returned. The odor stayed in the rooms long after Elizabeth left. Windows had to be opened or incense burned to clear the stench. Yet she still spoke proudly of her beautiful red hair. Everyone knew she wore wigs, but she refused to admit it. Ambassadors described her false hair in detail, often with hidden amusement. The prison of lead paint. Elizabeth's white face came from the daily use of ceruse, a mix of white lead and vinegar. This cosmetic gave her the mask she wanted but slowly poisoned her. Each morning servants applied it with animal hair brushes, building layers that cracked and flaked like plaster. The lead came from Cornish mines, where workers often died from its dust. Ground to fine powder, it spread through her chambers, settling on every surface. The vinegar was made from sour wine and added an acid bite. It burned her skin as it was rubbed in, while the poison stayed trapped against her flesh. The ritual was torture. The mixture stung as it was applied. Her eyes watered and her skin turned red. Still she continued to wear it every day. Elizabeth often had to sit still for an hour while the paste dried, unable to talk, eat, or drink. As the ceruse hardened, it created a white mask that looked smooth and elegant, but it was also grotesque. The pale surface appeared flawless, yet beneath it her skin was being destroyed layer by layer. The mask cracked during the day, forcing her to repair it constantly and check mirrors again and again. She never removed all of her makeup. Instead, she added new layers over old ones, building up a thick crust. When she tried to remove it, the hardened ceruse had to be scraped with ivory combs, tearing away skin and leaving bloody scratches, which she then covered with fresh poison the next morning. The poisoning from lead spread through her body. She suffered from fatigue, poor memory, and violent changes of mood. Her hair came out in clumps. Her teeth loosened and changed color. Her breath carried a metallic taste, which she tried to hide with sweet wine. Beneath the white mask, her real skin was covered with sores, scars, and dark stains that grew worse every year. Her lips were painted red with cochineal made from crushed beetles mixed with oil. In the heat, the oils went rancid, creating rotten smells that mixed with her breath. The clothing catastrophe. Elizabeth's splendid gowns were never washed or cleaned. They were never given rest. These dresses, more valuable than most people earned in a lifetime, became containers of dirt that no perfume could conceal. The queen owned more than 3,000 gowns of silk, velvet, and brocade, decorated with jewels and pearls. But their design made washing impossible. The layers of fabric, the delicate embroidery, and the stones would not survive rough soap. So gowns were only aired, brushed, and perfumed again. Elizabeth wore the same gown for days or weeks. Her sweat, odor, and body fluids soaked deep into the cloth. The rich textiles absorbed it like sponges, keeping permanent traces of her body. Dressing her in these outfits took hours and required many servants. First came the linen shift, an undergarment rarely washed, stiff and yellowed with old sweat. Then came a corset of steel and whalebone, pulled so tight it made breathing and digestion painful. It was never washed and became a place where bacteria thrived. The light colors of Elizabeth's gowns made stains easy to see. White, silver, and pale gold showed every drop. Even a small spill of wine could be noticed across the hall. Fully decorated, the gowns sometimes weighed 50 pounds, trapping heat and moisture inside. This created a greenhouse effect, forcing her to sweat heavily, the moisture soaking into the innermost layers of cloth. Her stockings, whether silk or fine wool, were seldom washed and soon developed holes that exposed toenails yellowed and filled with dirt. Shoes became storage for odor and fungal infection. Leather warped and stained, and the insides held smells that stayed even when not worn. Elizabeth was so attached to certain gowns that she sometimes refused to change them for days, saying they were her favorites or lucky. This caused filth to build up, as garments were worn for long periods without any attempt at cleaning. Elizabeth's digestion was another source of shame, creating hygiene issues beyond bad breath. Her heavy diet, constant medicines, and the stress of rule created problems in her stomach through her life. The Queen's meals lasted for hours and included many dishes: roasted meats, rich sauces, sweet desserts, wine and ale. Food was spiced to cover decay, and cooking often failed to kill bacteria in that age without refrigeration. Her favorites were fatty meats like swan and venison, difficult to digest and causing painful stomach upset. She consumed sugar in great amounts and many forms, disturbing her body's balance and adding to dental decay. Her manner of eating was also a problem. She often ate fast without chewing well, swallowing food quickly between court duties and meetings. This hurried eating led to indigestion and even choking. Trouble began soon after meals. Bloating and gas made her uncomfortable and ashamed. In a time when bodily functions were hidden, especially for women, her stomach troubles brought her constant worry and humiliation. Corsets pulled tight and many fabric layers pressed on her stomach and bowels, causing sharp pain. Sometimes she loosened the stays during meals, improper but hidden from public view. Her gas became a legend among courtiers, who politely ignored the noises and smells from the Queen. At times Elizabeth excused herself from events when the trouble was too strong, claiming illness though the cause was more shameful. Her medicines worsened everything. Mercury, prescribed for possible syphilis, worked as a strong laxative and caused diarrhea and cramps. Herbal cures contained poisons that brought nausea, vomiting, and other torment. Elizabeth's mouth was itself diseased, more than bad breath alone. Her gums and teeth were infected, making her mouth a breeding ground of bacteria. The odors and tastes from it reached into every part of her daily life. The Queen's tongue was often covered with a thick yellow film that added new layers of foul odor to her breath. This coating came from bacteria, dead cells, and food remains that were never removed. Because of poor oral care, it built up over many days, leaving a lasting bitter taste that Elizabeth compared to wormwood. Her gums were swollen and bleeding, seen as normal for someone of her age and rank. The constant blood mixed with saliva, creating metallic tastes she tried to hide with sweet wines and candied fruits. The blood also stained her teeth and tongue, adding to the horror inside her mouth. Elizabeth's saliva was affected by her medicines and by her illnesses. At times she produced too much thick saliva, which gathered in the corners of her mouth and left visible strings when she spoke. At other times her mouth was painfully dry, her tongue sticking to the roof and making speech difficult. Sugar in her diet gave bacteria the perfect ground to grow. It fed on her teeth and gums, multiplying and creating acids that damaged the tissues further. It was a cycle without end. The more sugar she ate to cover the bad taste, the worse her mouth became. Her throat stayed inflamed from infection spreading down from her mouth. She often complained of pain and trouble swallowing, blamed on different illnesses, but likely caused by constant bacteria flow. Elizabeth tried many ways to hide the problem. She chewed herbs like mint and rosemary, but they were quickly overwhelmed by decay. She used rinses of wine, vinegar, and honey, but the sugar in them only made the infection worse. Her main answer to these hygiene disasters was perfume. She poured on heavier perfumes and oils, hoping to mask her natural odors. But instead they mixed with her body smell and made it worse. Her favorite scent was civet musk, taken from the glands of African civet cats. This perfume was seen as a luxury, but mixed with months of sweat, it made a smell courtiers said was like a rose garden built on a cesspit. Perfume was applied every day and took almost as long as her makeup. Servants used soft brushes and fingers to put scents on her pulse points. They sprinkled powders into her hair and clothes, filling the air with clouds of scented dust. But perfumes of the 16th century were crude, made from animal parts and plant extracts that rotted in the heat. The oils on her skin often turned sour, producing rotten smells that mixed with Elizabeth's natural odor and created something unbearable. Fresh perfumes combined with rancid ones, forming scents that were both sweet and sickening, like flowers decaying in stagnant water. Her gowns became saturated with layers of perfume, surrounding her with clouds of scent that followed her wherever she went. Different fragrances reacted with each other and with her body, creating new odors that had little in common with the original ingredients. Her body heat made perfumes stronger and changed their character during the day. A pleasant fragrance in the morning became heavy and cloying by midday, and by evening it could be nauseating. Elizabeth appeared unaware of this change. She continued to apply more perfume during the day, not realizing she was making everything worse. Her collection of scents was vast and costly, imported from Europe and the Middle East. She owned perfumes made from rare flowers, exotic spices, and precious resins, each costing more than most people earned in a year. But no amount of perfume could cover months of unwashed smells. The foot horror show. Elizabeth's feet were perhaps the most neglected part of her body. They were hidden in silk stockings and ornate shoes, but they suffered from conditions that would have horrified any physician. Her feet became a constant source of pain and embarrassment, plagued by fungal infections, ingrown toenails, and other problems made worse by poor hygiene. Caring for her feet was a daily ordeal that servants dreaded. Her stockings of silk or wool were peeled away, revealing feet that looked nothing like the delicate forms praised in poetry. Her skin was pale and waterlogged from constant moisture, with fungal patches that gave off a rancid, cheesy smell. Her toenails grew long and thick, yellow and brittle from dampness and neglect. Some curled inward, pressing painfully on her toes and sometimes cutting into the flesh. The Queen's attempts to trim her nails were rough and often left cuts and infections that lasted for weeks. The spaces between her toes became perfect breeding grounds for fungus, spreading to the nails and making them thick and discolored. The smell from these infections was overpowering. Ladies-in-waiting described it as like rotting cheese mixed with vinegar. Elizabeth's shoes, though works of art, became containers for foot odor and bacterial growth. They were made from the finest leather and decorated with jewels and embroidery, but never cleaned or aired. They collected months of sweat, dead skin, and fluids seeping from her infected feet. The leather of Elizabeth's shoes became stained and warped, and the inside developed permanent odors noticeable even when they were not worn. Her habit of keeping the same shoes for days or weeks made her foot problems worse. Moisture from sweat and lack of air created perfect conditions for fungus and bacteria to thrive. The Queen often complained of burning or itching in her feet. She blamed many causes, but these symptoms were likely signs of the infections that plagued her lower limbs. Her foot odor was so strong and unique that servants could sometimes sense her arrival by smell alone. The odor stayed in rooms long after she left, so windows had to be opened and incense burned to clear the air. Foreign envoys even wrote about strange smells rising from the floor near the Queen's throne, not realizing it came from her feet. Her private chamber was the worst place of all, a room where months of filth turned the air into something hardly breathable. The royal bedroom, which should have been a place of comfort and privacy, became a nightmare of odors and filth that tested even the strongest stomachs. The bed itself was both a masterpiece and a monument of neglect. It was a great four-poster of carved oak with golden hangings, worth more than most castles. But the bed linen, changed perhaps once a month at best, became stiff with sweat, fluids, and ointments used on her skin. Sheets of fine linen or silk, once soft, hardened into rough cloth, yellowed and stained by fluids soaked deep into the fibers. The stains marked her nights. Dark patches from sweating, yellow spots from bladder weakness, red marks from sores that oozed and bled. The mattress, filled with feathers and down meant for comfort, became a nest for insects and germs. The feathers held dampness and odors, creating smells no airing could remove. Never cleaned or replaced, the mattress absorbed years of fluids reaching its core. Her nightgown of fine linen and lace became a second skin of filth. She wore it for weeks, changing only when it grew so stiff with dried fluids that it was hard to endure. The fabric yellowed and stiffened, holding stains that told the story of her nights. In winter, the room was kept closed to preserve heat, trapping all odors and creating an oppressive air. The chamber was filled with the smell of unwashed flesh, chamber pots, stale perfume, and medicines around the bed. Servants who entered in the morning sometimes gagged or held their breath, fighting sickness from the stench. As Elizabeth entered her final decade, her hygiene troubles became worse than ever. The buildup of poor hygiene, lead poisoning, and untreated sickness turned the once great queen into a symbol of decay. Her skin became covered with scars, sores, and discolored patches that no makeup could hide. Years of poison left her face scarred and pitted, with deep wounds that oozed and crusted, only to be hidden under new layers of toxic paint. Elizabeth's natural skin turned a sickly yellow-green, the result of liver damage and inner troubles caused by medicines and poor food. Her hair loss became complete, leaving her scalp marked with infected sores and scar tissue. To cover her baldness, wigs grew heavier and more ornate, but the weight and pressure only made her scalp worse. At times she scratched her head in public so hard that she drew blood, leaving new wounds that took weeks to heal. Her few remaining teeth were so loose that she could barely chew. Her meals became limited to broth, soft bread, and liquid medicines, but even these simple foods caused pain. The constant infection of her mouth spread into her throat and sinuses, bringing chronic inflammation that made speaking and breathing hard. Her body odor rose to near supernatural strength. The mix of unwashed skin, open sores, rotten teeth, and rancid perfumes produced a stench courtiers called the smell of death itself. She could be sensed rooms away, and servants sometimes fled when they heard she was near. Her mind also declined, likely from years of lead and poison. She forgot conversations, repeated herself, and raged violently over small slights. Her behavior grew unstable and unpredictable, making her court a daily trial. Elizabeth Tudor died on March 24, 1603, at Richmond Palace. The woman who ruled England for nearly 50 years was gone, and with her died the illusions that had hidden her private horrors. After her death, the truth became clear. Servants preparing her body found a figure unlike the portraits that had once shown her beauty. Rooms she lived in held her odors for months after. Some palace spaces were closed and abandoned, considered too foul to use again. And now you stand once more in the shadows of Greenwich Palace. But the summer air carries only roses from the gardens outside. The horror has been washed away, the truth polished into golden myths that once covered such decay. Yet if you listen to the wind moving through old stone, you may still catch the whispers of servants, the shocked gasps of envoys, and the heavy breath of a queen who learned too late that some crowns weigh more than others, and some triumphs cost more than defeat. Elizabeth Tudor's greatest enemy was not Spain or France. It was the mirror that showed the price of denying the body's needs. The queen who said she was married to England died wedded to her own decay, and the kingdom she left had to open the windows, cleanse the palaces, and hope that the reign of the new king would smell sweeter than her 45 long, putrid years.